The planet of Xylaris was burning. Smoke rose like black pillars into the blood-red sky, and the echo of explosions shook the foundations of the Grand Palace. Once this palace had been the symbol of the alien empire's power, shining with crystal towers and banners of the royal crest. Now fire ate away at its beauty, and the sound of fear spread louder than the sound of war. Queen Serath, ruler of the Xylarian Empire, stood at the heart of her throne chamber. Her golden crown, shaped like the wings of a hawk, glimmered faintly under the flickering lights. Around her, the royal guards, massive warriors bred for strength, shifted nervously. Their sharp armor clinked, and their eyes betrayed something Serath hated to see in soldiers. Hesitation. The rebels had come. They were not supposed to reach this far. Her empire had promised her loyalty, had sworn that the royal guard would never break. Yet now, as the walls trembled from enemy blasts, she could see their discipline crumbling like dust. "Hold your positions," Serath commanded, her voice sharp as steel. "The throne will not fall today." But her words, powerful as they were, could not erase the fear in their hearts. At the far side of the chamber stood a man who was not Xylarian. His frame was smaller than the towering guards, his armor less decorated, his weapon a standard-issue rifle rather than a blade of honor. He was Captain Elias Ward, a human soldier. Months ago, he had arrived as part of a cultural exchange program, an attempt by Earth to build goodwill with the Empire. To most of the Queen's Council, Elias was little more than a curiosity. Humans were considered weak by galactic standards. Their muscles were not as thick as reptilian warriors, their speed not as quick as insectoid fighters, their technology not as ancient as the Xylarian Empire. Yet Elias had served quietly, listening, training, and guarding without complaint. Now, as the enemy's war machines drew closer, it was Elias who watched the guards with sharp eyes. He saw the tremors in their hands, the twitch of their legs, the instinct to flee. He had seen this before in human battles too. Fear was universal, but what came after fear was what separated true warriors from cowards. The palace doors rattled. A deafening blast sent shards of crystal raining down. One of the guards cried out, dropping his weapon. Another took a step back. Then another. In moments, the entire line of the Queen's protectors began to scatter. "Where are you going?" Serath's voice rose with fury, but even her command could not stop them. One by one, the alien guards turned and fled through the side exits, abandoning their oath. Their heavy footsteps echoed like betrayal in the Queen's ears. Serath's heart pounded. She was the Queen of Xylaris, ruler of worlds, and yet in her moment of greatest need she stood alone. Alone, except for one. Elias did not move. He did not run. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between the Queen and the shattered doorway. Smoke and sparks poured into the chamber, and beyond them, the glowing eyes of enemy machines drew closer. "Stay behind me," Elias said simply. His voice was calm, steady, like stone in the storm. The Queen stared at him, stunned. "You would shield me? You one human?" Elias glanced back, his eyes unwavering. "Doesn't matter what I am. You're not falling while I can stand." The next blast came. The walls shuddered, and a swarm of enemy drones burst into the room, their weapons glowing. Elias didn't flinch. He raised his rifle and fired in short, controlled bursts. His aim was precise, his movements efficient. The first drone fell, then the second. Sparks lit the chamber like lightning, but more came. The enemy's forces poured in, a tide of metal and fire. Elias gritted his teeth and stood firm. He positioned his body so that the Queen was shielded, taking the brunt of the assault. A blast scorched his shoulder armor, but he did not step aside. Another explosion sent him sprawling, but he rolled back to his feet, weapon still in hand. Queen Serath could only watch in disbelief. Her royal guards, trained since birth to defend her, had fled like frightened children. Yet this human, an outsider, mocked as fragile, stood against an army with nothing but courage and willpower. "Captain Ward," she called out, her voice breaking with urgency. "We must retreat." "Then retreat," Elias answered, firing again. "I'll buy you time." The words struck her harder than the explosions. He would sacrifice himself for her, not for his world, not for his kind, but for her. For a brief moment, Serath felt something she had not felt in years: respect. Not demanded respect, not fear-born loyalty, but respect freely earned. Another wave of drones charged, and Elias emptied the last of his rifle's energy cells. He dropped the weapon, pulled a sidearm, and kept firing. When that was nearly drained, he grabbed a fallen guard's blade and swung it with grim determination. His body became a wall, his will a shield. Sareth realized she could not simply stand still. This was her fight too. Gathering her strength, she raised her hands and summoned a surge of psychic energy, blasting back part of the enemy. The chamber shook, and for a moment they stood side by side, the alien queen and the human soldier. Together they pushed toward the escape passage hidden behind the throne. Elias, battered and bleeding, still moved first, clearing the way, blocking attacks, shielding her with his body at every turn. As they disappeared into the tunnel, the queen glanced back one last time at the chamber that had nearly become her tomb. She remembered her guards running away. She remembered Elias standing firm. Her people had failed her. The human had not. And deep within her heart, Queen Sareth whispered a vow. She would never forget the moment when one human soldier showed more loyalty than an entire empire. The secret passage beneath the throne chamber was narrow and dark, its walls carved from ancient stone. For centuries it had been used only by royalty in times of danger, and tonight Queen Sareth used it not with her elite guards, but with one lone human soldier. Elias Ward moved ahead, his steps firm despite the burns and cuts across his armor. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes were sharp, scanning every shadow. Behind him, Queen Sareth walked quickly, her long cloak brushing the dusty floor. Her golden crown had slipped, but she did not pause to fix it. The echoes of war still rumbled above them. Explosions, screams, and the roar of collapsing towers. The queen's heart was filled with disbelief. Her people, her trained defenders, had abandoned her without hesitation. Yet here was Elias, a foreigner mocked for his weakness, shielding her again and again. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into a ruined street outside the palace walls. Smoke filled the air. Fires burned across the skyline. The once glorious capital city was now a battlefield. Broken ships lay in pieces, and the cries of civilians echoed through the night. Elias crouched at the exit, raising his hand to halt the queen. "Stay low. The rebels will be hunting you." Sareth's voice trembled with frustration. "I am their queen. They should fear me." "They don't fear you right now," Elias said simply. "They think they've already won. That makes them dangerous." The queen stared at him for a moment. No one in her empire had ever spoken to her like that. Without ceremony, without bowing, without fear. Yet his words were true. They moved quickly, slipping between ruined buildings. Every few steps, Elias checked the corners, listening for movement. His training as a soldier showed in every careful motion. He had fought in human wars before, wars where survival depended on staying sharp, not on the honor of wearing decorated armor. As they passed a collapsed tower, Sareth caught sight of a small group of civilians trapped under rubble. A child cried out, reaching with tiny arms. Elias froze, torn between duty to the queen and instinct to help. "Go," Sareth said coldly. "They are not your mission." But Elias shook his head. "They're people. That's reason enough." Before she could reply, he ran to the rubble, lifting heavy stones with gritted teeth. He freed the child and helped the family to safety behind a wall. When he returned, his armor was scratched, his hands bleeding, but his eyes were steady. The queen watched silently. Never had she seen such a thing. Her own guards would have ignored civilians if it meant protecting the throne. Yet Elias had risked time, strength, and exposure to danger for strangers who could not repay him. "Why?" she asked softly as they continued. "Because no one deserves to be left behind," Elias answered. "Not a queen, not a child." His words struck her deeper than any weapon. She realized that humans fought not for fear of punishment, not for the promise of reward, but because they believed in something higher than themselves. As they pressed onward, rebels began to appear in the streets. Armed patrols searched the ruins, hunting for survivors and for the queen herself. Elias led Sarah through back alleys, ducking into shadows whenever patrols passed. At one point, they stumbled upon a rebel machine blocking their path. It was tall, its steel body glowing with red lights armed with twin plasma cannons. Elias knew they couldn't outrun it. "Stay behind me," he whispered again. He grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the ground, his rifle long since drained of energy. Then he spotted a fuel cell lying half buried in rubble. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the machine, drawing its fire. Plasma blasts scorched the ground around him. At the last second, he hurled the fuel cell into the machine's chest and struck it with the pipe. The explosion rocked the street, sending fire into the night sky. The machine collapsed, destroyed. Elias staggered back, smoke rising from his armor. He was coughing, barely able to stand, but he still reached out a hand to guide the queen forward. "You're injured," Serath said, her voice sharp with concern. "I'll manage," Elias replied, forcing a small smile. "We're not done yet." For the first time, Serath felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of admiration and confusion. Why would this man sacrifice so much for her? Not because she commanded it, not because of duty, but because he chose to. As they hid in a broken temple to rest, the queen studied him closely. His face was lined with dirt, sweat, and pain, yet his eyes still carried light, a fire she had not seen in even her greatest generals. "You are not like my people," she admitted. "They obey because they fear me. You fight because—" "Why?" Elias leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "Because protecting someone else is what makes us human. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're queen or soldier. No one should stand alone." The queen was silent for a long time. His words echoed in her heart. No one should stand alone. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. The rebels had tracked them. Elias pulled himself to his feet, gripping the stolen blade. "Stay back," he said again. But Serath stepped forward, her own power building in her hands. For the first time since the fall of her throne, she felt something stir inside her. Not cold authority, but real strength. She would not let this human fight alone. Side by side, they burst from the temple. Elias struck with the blade, swift and fearless. Serath unleashed her psychic energy, blasting enemies with waves of force. Together, they carved a path through the rebels and vanished once more into the ruins. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, dawn was breaking. Smoke rose into the new sky, painting the horizon red and gold. They were alive, but barely. As they rested near an abandoned spaceport, Serath looked at Elias. "You fight like no warrior I have ever known," she said quietly. "You risk yourself for me, for strangers, for anyone in need. Why would you do this?" Elias looked back at her with tired but steady eyes. "Because it's the human way. We protect, even when it costs us everything." The queen felt her chest tighten again. For the first time in her reign, she wondered if perhaps her empire had been wrong all along. Perhaps true power was not in fear or force, but in loyalty freely given. She gazed at Elias, and in that moment she understood. This human soldier had already changed the fate of her empire. The spaceport at the edge of the ruined city was silent but not safe. Broken ships lay scattered across the landing fields, their metal frames twisted like skeletons. The air smelled of smoke and burning fuel. Captain Elias Ward led Queen Serath through the wreckage, every step slow but steady. His body ached with wounds, yet his determination did not falter. They had survived the night, but the danger was not over. The rebels knew the queen was alive, and they would not stop until she was captured or killed. Elias understood this better than anyone. The spaceport was their last chance for escape, but it was also the perfect place for an ambush. Serath moved beside him, her golden crown cracked, her royal robes torn and stained. She no longer looked like the untouchable ruler of an empire. She looked like a survivor. Yet her eyes burned brighter than they had in years, lit by something new. Hope. As they neared the central hangar, Elias raised his hand. He heard footsteps. The sound of boots, heavy and many. They were not alone. Out from the smoke marched the rebels. Dozens of them armed with rifles and energy blades. Behind them, towering machines rolled forward, their red sensors glowing like eyes of demons. The rebels had found them. Elias's grip tightened on his stolen blade. His rifle was long gone, his ammo spent. All he had left was a broken weapon and his will. But when he glanced at the queen, he gave her a small nod. "It ends here," he said quietly. The rebels surrounded them, weapons raised. Their leader, a scarred alien with burning eyes, stepped forward. His voice echoed across the spaceport. "Your guards abandoned you. Your people no longer bow. The throne of Zularis has fallen, Queen Serath. Surrender, and perhaps we will let you live." Serath lifted her head proudly, but before she could answer, Elias stepped in front of her. "You'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice calm but loud enough for all to hear. The rebels laughed. A single human against an army? It sounded like madness, but to Serath it sounded like truth. Then the battle began. The machines fired first, sending blasts of plasma across the field. Elias pushed Serath behind a pile of wreckage, taking the brunt of the shockwave himself. His armor cracked, his body shook, but he still stood. He dashed forward, slashing at the nearest rebel with his blade. His movements were not perfect, he was tired, wounded. But every strike carried the weight of his resolve. Sirath joined him, summoning her psychic power. Bolts of energy erupted from her hands, striking enemies down. Together they fought, but the numbers were against them. The rebels pressed closer, surrounding them. At one point, Elias was knocked to the ground by a blast. His weapon clattered away. The rebel leader raised his blade, ready to finish him. "No," Sirath cried. In a surge of power, she unleashed a wave of force so strong it hurled the rebels backward. She ran to Elias and pulled him up. "You cannot fall," she said firmly. Elias, bleeding and staggering, forced himself to his feet. "Neither can you." They stood together again, back to back, surrounded by enemies. Elias raised his fists, ready to fight with nothing but his hands if he had to. It was then that something unexpected happened. Hidden among the ruins, loyal citizens and soldiers who had once fled began to return. They had seen the human stand. They had seen their queen fight beside him, not above him. Shame filled their hearts for abandoning her, and courage returned to their bones. One by one they emerged from the shadows, first a handful, then dozens, then more. They shouted the queen's name, rallying to her side. "For the queen," they cried. The tide of battle shifted. The rebels, once so confident, began to falter as loyalists surged forward. The spaceport became a storm of fire and steel, with Elias and Sirath at its center. Elias struck down enemy after enemy, his body a wall of protection. Sirath's power lit the battlefield, turning fear into fire. At last, the rebel leader stood face to face with Elias. The alien sneered. "Why do you fight, human? This is not your war." Elias, barely able to stand, gripped his blade. "Because loyalty means something. Because no one should stand alone." With one final strike, he defeated the rebel leader, sending shock through the enemy ranks. The rebels broke, retreating into the ruins. Silence fell over the spaceport, broken only by the crackle of flames. The queen's loyalists gathered around her, their heads bowed in respect. For the first time, they were not bowing out of fear, but out of choice. Sirath looked at Elias. His armor was shattered, his body bruised, but his eyes still held fire. He had shielded her again and again, never asking for reward. She stepped forward, raising her voice so all could hear. "Today you saw what true courage is," she declared. "My guards fled, but this human stood firm. He is not of our world, yet he fought harder than any warrior of Xylaris. From this day forward, humanity will no longer be mocked as weak. They will be honored as allies, as equals." The loyalists cheered, their voices echoing across the ruins. The legend was born in that moment, the day the alien queen was abandoned by her own people, but saved by a single human soldier. As the cheers faded, Elias finally allowed himself to collapse, his strength spent. Sirath caught him before he hit the ground. "You are not just a soldier," she said softly. "You are a shield, and because of you, my empire has hope again." Elias gave her a faint smile, his voice barely a whisper. "That's what humans do. We protect." And with those words, he closed his eyes, resting at last. The dawn rose over Xylaris, lighting the sky with gold. The queen stood tall, her people gathering around her, her heart forever changed. She had been saved not by power, not by fear, but by the courage of one human who refused to run. And across the galaxy, the story spread. The alien queen's own guards fled, but the human soldier shielded her with his body. It became not just a tale of survival, but a reminder that sometimes the smallest spark of loyalty can ignite the greatest fire of change.